Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. It's a Tuesday. Generally on Tuesdays, it's open forum, and that's what we're going to do today. Trent Horn is our guest, however. And I say however because we've been missing Trent a little bit, and it's nice to have him back. Your questions welcome, 888-318-7884. Trent's forte, as you know, is defending the faith. Maybe you've got a question. We did atheism yesterday. Maybe some folks who didn't get on can want to call today and talk with Trent. Maybe you want to talk about the life issues. Trent loves talking about that. You want to talk about Jesus? You want to talk about the Bible? Trent loves doing all that big stuff. 888-318-7884. Trent is an apologist here at Catholic Answers, an extraordinary writer with a whole bunch of books. I think about 500,000 books now, including Why We're Catholic, which I think is the best-selling book that's ever been produced by Catholic Answers Press. Trent Horn, thanks for being with us for Open Forum.
Good to be here with you, Cy. I haven't written 500,000 books, but I think I may have sold about 500,000 copies of them all put together, the bulk of that being Why We're Catholic.
Yeah, that was the big one. And
it's helped a lot of people. I'm very grateful of that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, I mean, they're all good ones, but it does seem to me we are in an age where a lot of us can go a long time without getting even the basics. You know, we're doing the best we can, but to have a book that goes through with you, here's what we believe about this and about that as Catholics and why we believe those things, very helpful.
And not just that side, but I tried what I think has made the book very successful is I wrote it to here's what Catholics believe, why we believe it, and it was written in a tone that you could give it to a non-Catholic.
Yeah.
You could give that book to anyone who has an 8th grade reading level and higher. And so I think that's what made it very helpful because prior to writing Why We're Catholic, and it just amazed me. I mean, this we go all the way to 2015. You'd say, look, let's say I know a friend. He's thinking of becoming Catholic. What book should I give him?
Yep.
I mean, that's the question, right? And I see it all the time online, on social media. And the answers people give are always really funny. Some of them are more... There's like some say, give him the Summa. I'm like, that might... Does he need a coffee table? Like, the problem is, I mean, it's great, but it's heavy stuff. Or the Confessions of St. Augustine. They're beautiful things, but sometimes people just need the basic meat and potatoes introduction to the faith. But before I wrote Why We're Catholic, I gave people Rome Sweet Home, which I thought was really good for Protestants, but it wasn't really helpful for atheists. Yeah. So that's why I was really excited to be able to write that book.
888-318-7884 is our number. If you want to talk with Trent about any of the kind of the hard challenges we get about how to defend the Catholic faith, that's what Trent does, and you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Are you working on a book now? You got one?
Yes, I am working on a book right now. The title, I think, is Conversations with My Inner Anti-Catholic, but it's a dialogue book. And it's a dialogue book of me having a conversation with my inner skeptic, the doubting voice inside my head that gives the doubts that I have, and how do I answer them as an apologist, or how would I, as an apologist, try to refute the Catholic faith? So it's a dialogue with myself, basically. So it's like in Superman 3. When Superman gets exposed to red kryptonite and it makes him all angry, and he has the fight with himself in the junkyard. It's kind of like that.
You should probably name it that. Maybe red kryptonite, Catholic red kryptonite, something like that.
I could just call it the book Superman 3.
Oh, there's a thought. You probably sell a lot of copies.
I was just put it right there.
I wonder how the DC people will feel about that.
Right? They haven't made it to a Superman 3 yet because they don't know how to make a good Superman movie. Sorry, controversial.
Oh, come on now.
You know what the best Superman movie is, actually, Cy?
What?
It's a DC animated film called All-Star Superman. It's really good.
I've never seen it. I did, however, grow up watching the TV show, the Superman TV show, in reruns. I wasn't a baby. I wasn't alive in the 1950s, but...
I was about to say, wait, the cartoon or the one like from the 1930s where he flies around on wires?
It's 1950s, and
was it the 50s?
Yeah, and
that's right.
It was a great show until you realized one thing, that the criminals always did the same thing to Superman. They would unload their 6-shooter into him, and he would just stand there, arms akimbo, bam, bam, bam. The bullet's just bouncing off his chest. And then what do you do if you're a criminal? You throw the gun.
You throw the gun at him.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to throw the gun at him.
And then what does he do? He ducks. He ducks when they throw the gun every time. Like the bullets, no problem. But when they throw the gun, he ducks. And once you notice that, it takes a lot of the fun out of the show.
Maybe old 1950s firing pins were made with like lead and kryptonite.
Yeah,
and they didn't
maybe.
know it was kryptonite.
I don't know. But it was always six
That's
shots and then throw the gun. And then Superman would duck when you threw the gun. 888-318-7884. Luca in Los Angeles, California. You're going to start us off. Luca watching on YouTube Live. Glad to have you, Luca. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hey, guys. How you doing? This is Luca. I appreciate you taking my call. I was just wondering, why Catholic and not just Christian?
Sure, it's a great question. It was one that I had to face in my conversion. So I believed there was a God, and I looked at the New Testament documents and came to the conclusion, all right, these human writings show that Jesus of Nazareth lived, died, and he came back to life, and he established a church. So the fact that Jesus rose from the dead means I should be a Christian, and I want to follow the people who followed Jesus. I think that when many people come to the realization Jesus rose from the dead and are Christian, they then make another jump instantly to Protestantism and say, okay, then I believe the Bible, these 66 books, Catholic Bibles have 73, more books, you have more books in the Old Testament, same in the New. These 66 books, Sola Scriptura, saved by faith alone, but I don't think that that's really justified. If you just believe Jesus rose from the dead, how do you get to that? I don't see a viable path to show, okay, well, why would I go from that to just this particular authority as a Protestant, 66 books, Sola Scriptura. So I would say, okay, if I believe Jesus rose from the dead, I'm going to trust Jesus. What do these historical sources tell me about Jesus's authority? Did the authority Christ have continue after he ascended into heaven? And the Bible seems very clear. It was given to the apostles. Then the next question is, okay, well, where did their authority go? Jesus never wrote anything down. During his earthly ministry, he never told, well, except writing in the sand at the stoning of the woman and caught in adultery. But he didn't write any books or letters. He didn't command anyone to write anything prior to his ascension. There's no hint in the Bible that a collection of books is supposed to be our sole authority. Rather, the Bible speaks about the Word of God in written and unwritten form, and the Church of the living God as the pillar and foundation of truth. So the more I went and saw this, I saw, oh, wait, this is where we receive things like the canon of Scripture, sacred tradition that says divine revelation ended at the end of the first century. And so it all kind of clicked together for me. That was part of it. And then there were a lot of other things that pushed me to Catholicism, like the belief in the real presence in the Eucharist, the fact that the Catholic view of salvation made the most sense of the teachings I could find in the Bible. But I would say that when I read the first Christians, I saw, wait a minute, these guys aren't practicing sola scriptura or Protestant theology. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, at the beginning of the second century, said, where the bishop is, there is the Catholic Church. And he said, follow the bishop as Jesus Christ follows the Father. So to me, I see that there's good evidence that the apostles' authority continued in successors, living successors, who are the guardians of God's word and sacred scripture and sacred tradition. And so I want to be united with those successors in the church Christ founded, which would be the universal church, the church that has the historical pedigree going back to the first century. So, Luca, I know that was a brief explanation, but I would be happy to send you a copy of my book, Why We're Catholic, if you would like a little bit more on that, and my book, The Case for Catholicism. Would that interest you?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for answering that question. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course, and I think the books will go more in depth as well.
Hang on, Luca, and Marie will get your information. Appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for starting us off with the call. As soon as we're done with Luca, there'll be two lines open. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884 if you have a guest if you have a question for our guest, not a guest for our question. 888-318-7884. A great way to have a terrific Lent? Challenge yourself and a friend to take the 20 Answers Lenten Challenge. Read 20 of our 20 Answers books in 40 days, including perhaps one or two by our present guest, Trent Horn. Visit shop.catholic.com for more information. That's the 20 Answers Lenten Challenge at shop.catholic.com.
Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Catholic Answers Focus is the podcast for living, understanding, and defending your Catholic faith, and you're not going to want to miss it this week. We've got our friend Monica Dumit from Australia to talk about what's happening with confession and how governments are infringing on the right to confession around the world. And we've also got Chris Check, the first part of a 3-part series on the Inquisition. CatholicAnswersFocus.com is where you can find us, or find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or just watch us on YouTube, CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Coverage as seen through a Catholic lens.
All people of faith and sincerity need to awaken to this and protect this fundamental right of religious liberty.
Expert analysis.
Does Revelation judge history, or does history judge Revelation?
Stories vital to people of faith.
It's part of our faith that comedy and tragedy naturally go hand in hand.
Delivered to your inbox every week. Sign up today. Go to EWTN.com/worldover.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Our guest is Trent Horn. Trent, author of a whole bunch of books, including the one we talked about already, Why We're Catholic. I got Answering Atheism right here next to me. Persuasive Pro-Life, he's the author of. Trent loves to talk about the big things, the big issues, whether you're Catholic or not. You know, if you're like, wait, I'm an atheist, I want to challenge that, Trent Horn, you can call. Or maybe you're a pro-choice person, but it's an open forum, so you pick the topic. 888-318-7884. Let's go to, remember yesterday Kevin from Kentucky called? But he wanted to ask about teleology, and he waits till like the last 4 minutes of the show, and then he has this great question. Come on, Kevin. He called back. All right, so we're good. We got Kevin.
Well, that's good. Let's have him on.
Yep. All right. Kevin from Kentucky, you there with us?
I am. Hi. Thank you for having me back.
Oh, we're happy.
It wasn't very fair of me.
It
definitely wasn't very fair of me to ask such a big question with such little time left. So I made sure that I called.
We were just teasing, though, Kevin. We were just teasing.
We put you at the end. So yeah, Kevin, let's recheck a little. You were an atheist, though you have a special concern about Catholicism because of the issue of teleology. Feel free to explain that a bit more for our listeners, and then we can discuss again.
Sure. So one argument for God is the teleological argument. Teleology is essentially the study of ends or purposes. Teloi is just the Greek word for an end or a purpose. Aquinas argued that there are these inherent teloi, and that because these things exist, we can argue that God exists. My beef with that is that I think that ends or purposes are just things that are imbued upon objects or actions by thinking beings like me and you. We briefly got started on science, but I don't think I really understood what you meant, and then we ran out of time. And then real quick, I'd like just to say, even though I'm not Catholic, I'm a big fan of both Cy and you, Trent. I love the fact that you guys engage in these conversations with good faith. So big fan, and thanks for having me back.
Of course.
You have to send him free stuff now that he said that. At the end, you have to send him free stuff. Okay.
Yeah, we'll find a place there. I'm trying to get the sense of your concern about teleology and ends and purposes in science, because there's different ways to hash this out. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas, borrowing from Aristotle, talked about the 4 causes in things: the material, formal, efficient, and final. Final would be like the telos, the teleological, the final cause. So if a man makes a statue of David, the marble is the material cause. The shape of the marble is the formal cause of the statue. The man is the efficient cause of the statue. The man is the reason the statue exists. And the reason the man made the statue is the final cause there. Although there's ways to see final causation even in non-human elements. But that's that's the Thomistic view. I don't think we have to go down that road super duper deep, because I wanted to talk to you about the laws of nature and design. The point I raised was that it seems like in science we discover there are these very predictable regularities in nature. And you talked about how we impose ends or purposes, but I just don't think that's the case. Like when we discover Newton's third law of motion, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's not us. I mean, we're giving a label to something, but the thing exists regardless of whether we label it. And that thing is like this predictable kind of causal relationship that exists in the world, that things happen towards certain ends, if you will. So it doesn't seem that controversial to me. Maybe you could share why it's controversial to you.
Sure. So I guess for me, the controversy comes in where you actually call it an end or a purpose. So the fact that something is not the same thing as something having an end or a purpose. I happen to be male, but that does not mean that my purpose is to be male. I have many purposes in my life.
Okay, yeah,
So,
and I think that, sure, and I should send you an article on this, Kevin, because the Catholic philosopher Ed Feser discusses this about final causation in his book on Aquinas. And he says that, yeah, that doesn't mean, for example, like, well, what is the final cause of a mountain, that it has a kind of purpose, like a statue has a purpose. I think the word purpose and end, they're not necessarily synonymous. So like an end is just what it tends toward, like the end. There are things that, on Earth, things naturally tend towards decay because of because of entropy. But purpose, we usually talk about with agents, like, what is my purpose in life? So I agree with you that just because there are some predictable things in nature, it doesn't mean we can get purpose straight from them. But I do think that provides a clue that the universe is not random itself, but is the product of some kind of design, some kind of, and if it has a design, that would mean there's a designer. And so there might be a grand overarching purpose for the universe, even if we can't detect like conscious purpose in every atomic reaction. Does that make sense?
Sure, and that's not really the beef that I had, I suppose.
Okay.
I think you pointed out yesterday that one can be Catholic and still not really be super moved by the teleological argument.
Sure.
And maybe it's worthwhile for me to tell you why I even care about the teleological argument.
Yeah, I guess.
So
why is it so concerning to you? Sure.
Yeah. So I am ex-Catholic, and during the whole deconstruction process, I'll be straight up and tell you, I wanted to be a gay affirming Christian. Like I wanted that to not be a sin. And so I explored all these, why is it a sin? And realistically, the only thing that I could find that would explain that naturalistically was the teleological argument. So, same-sex unions are a sin because it frustrates the purpose of a marriage. It frustrates the telos of it. That just didn't make any sense at all to me. So I quickly disposed of teleology. And for a while, I was a Catholic who, a gay-affirming Catholic, I guess, is what a lot of them call themselves. So I was a Catholic who rejected teleology.
I see.
But clearly, that's not a position that the church holds. The church does hold that, same-sex unions are sinful. And to me, I don't see how you can hold that without also holding teleology. Like they kind of seem like a package deal. So that's kind of why it seems
right. But Kevin, I guess let's just take a step back here. Like I was getting away from kind of the jargon. It seems to make sense to me that when we look at certain things, we judge whether they're flourishing based on whether they're reaching a certain end. So if I look at a cat, for example, and if the cat never ends up learning to read, we wouldn't say the cat is not flourishing because reading is not part of the end of what it means to be a cat. But if I look at like my kids, I have 3 boys, if none of them learn to read, I would say they're not flourishing, or at least they're not properly flourishing, because reading, rationally understanding other ideas, that's a part of what we should tend towards as human beings. So do you think you would agree with that basic assumption that, hey, there's a certain way human beings should strive? There are certain ends we should move towards and others we shouldn't, in accord with our nature. What do you think of that, just kind of more basic starting point?
So you actually won't hear too much disagreement from me. Maybe that very last little phrase of like in accordance with our nature, that's the only part where you might hear some disagreement. But I think it's very useful to talk about ends or purposes. It's useful to talk about flourishing, because flourishing is a good thing. So it's very useful for us to talk about human flourishing. But there's nothing intrinsic about human flourishing. And in fact, there's nothing intrinsic about cat flourishing either. If there was a cat that did
what do you
learn how
mean?
to-
What do you mean intrinsic? Help me understand, because I agree with you. If a cat learned to read or talk, like the cat on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, I wouldn't say the cat has failed to flourish, but it's flourished in a very unusual way. And then there's going to be animals that have mutations that produce traits that are unusual that benefit them. But it seems to me like there's different ways we change and grow, but we need some kind of standard to determine if we're approaching a good end or a bad end for a certain thing. And that's going to be different based on what the kind of thing is. Don't you think?
Yeah, so it's 100%. It's going to be different. Calling something, saying that something has fulfilled its end is only as useful as the metric that you're using to measure that end.
Right.
So a useful metric is flourishing, so that's why we talk about flourishing a lot. But there's nothing that says that flourishing needs to be the intrinsic thing by which we measure everything.
I use it as more of a catch-all or an open term, but I think that by flourishing we mean increasing in goodness, I guess. But it seems to me that when we compare different things and see if they're increasing in goodness or decreasing, there are some. I don't know if there are really that many universal standards out there, except for like existence is a good. But it seems like we'd have to look at the thing. So the reason I'm just kind of narrowing in, it seems like we can look at people and we can say people that grow in virtues like justice and friendship and courage, they're approaching the proper end of a human being, and people who grow in vices like injustice or cowardice or hatred, they're not approaching their proper end. So, I mean, if we have that, and if that makes sense, I do think we can look at the world of our sexual behavior and apply like a similar standard. Tracking so far? Or do you have any other thoughts?
So I guess my thought is that you listed some things that I would agree with, like growing in virtue, like growing in charity is flourishing. Like, yeah, I agree. No argument there. However, you and I both agreed right there that we're agreeing to this baseline of flourishing. And I don't see any kind of intrinsic requirement in the universe for flourishing. In fact, it almost seems the opposite. But that's neither here nor there. And the teleological argument to me seems to make this assumption that there is some kind of end or purpose that is intrinsic to everything. So, the telos of fire is to burn. And it is that way because, well, it is that way. And without that assumption, the teleological argument doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense.
Well, I don't think so, Kevin, because let's say we do medicine. Like when we try to do medicine on the human body, when we try to figure out things like, does this person have a healthy heart or a bad heart? Does this person have a healthy stomach or an unhealthy stomach? We would ask, well, what makes a heart healthy? Well, a heart is healthy when it's being a heart. Well, what does a heart do? And we look at its structure and we see, well, it pumps blood. And what does a stomach do? Now, that's one way of looking at it in a teleological way. That's kind of more the Thomistic way. But I do think there's other ways of just looking at human beings. Like the new natural law, people would say, well, it's like, how do we know people are being good friends? Well, what is friendship? It's this kind of universal thing. We can't change what it is. But I don't want to run out of time with you. I might, but I'm really enjoying this, and I have your email. But do you have one last thought? I'll wrap it up after the break, and then I will send you some resources, and I would enjoy chatting with you again. Well,
the thought will have to be quick, Kevin.
My last thought is just thank you for having me twice. Really appreciate it.
Well, that's the last time.
Kevin,
we're not doing this again. No, forget it.
Kevin,
I'm done with Kevin.
I'll send you.
Nope.
No,
All
Kevin,
right,
I will send you some resources. Maybe we'll have you back on in a few weeks.
We'll take a quick break. Yes, let's do that. We'll take a quick break. Right back with more Open Forum.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Why does everyone need to be saved? Does the Bible say we're saved by faith alone and not by works? What does the Catholic Church teach about heaven, hell, and purgatory? In 20 Answers Salvation, you'll find smart, solid answers to these questions and many more, laying out the beautiful story of how God calls us out of sin, justifies us, makes us holy, and leads us to everlasting life with Him. 20 Answers Salvation is part of the 20 Answers series from Catholic Answers, offering hard facts, powerful arguments, and clear explanations of the most important topics facing the Church and the world, all in a compact, easy-to-read package. Visit shop.catholic.com today and take a look at this exciting new series from Catholic Answers Press.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the Church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to the Kevin and Trent Show. Oh, no, Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Killett, your host.
I
thought it was great. I really like Kevin, and I'm glad you guys got to have that conversation.
I enjoyed that because a lot of times, Cy, when I've spoken with atheists online on Catholic Answers Live, it can be very combative and not in good faith, in the sense that the other person, one sign of someone not being in good faith is when they refuse to agree with you, even on trivial things.
Yeah, right.
That's a sign the person you're talking to, if they see any sign of agreement as like defeat, and so they won't agree even with a trivial point of agreement, then it's just really hard to have any kind of conversation. But Kyle and I could have a good conversation, and Kevin, sorry, I was up very late last night with children and editing, and was it Kyle or Kevin?
It was Kevin. No, it was Kevin. I'm not lying to you.
Why do I think it was Kyle? I got the first letter right.
Yeah, you did. I don't know why you think it's Kyle.
And there's an E in Kyle and Kevin.
Yeah.
So I was glad to speak with him, and I appreciated his candor in saying that, look, I have a problem with this teaching because I have this desire for same-sex relationships. The Church says this desire is wrong. Why does the Church say that based on teleology? Well, I don't accept teleology.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to get into the philosophical nitty-gritty, but I do think we can look at human beings, we look at people. There's a way we're supposed to be. I really do think that that's a deep down thing. Like we always say, like, oh, this isn't who I am, this isn't who I'm supposed to be, what is my purpose in life? We try to figure out human beings are for something, our lives are for something, sex is for something, and it's not just totally arbitrary. So we got to use reason to figure that out. And God has given us ways of knowing how to discover what our lives are for, what our bodies are for, what sexuality is for. And I appreciate Kevin's investigation, his integrity in that. And so I'll send him resources. Maybe he and I will chat again at some point. But so pray for him. He seems to have a very open mind, and it's there's a lot of intellectual, spiritual, and emotional issues to sort out when you have same-sex attraction. And anyone who's listening who would like more information on that, the Apostolic Courage, I think their website is Courage RCnet. Father Philip Pachansky is the executive director. They do a lot of great work on this subject to help people, especially people who want to be Catholic, live a chaste life in accord with God's plan for sexuality. That apostolate's very good in that regard.
Kevin, I hope we will get to speak with you again. I'm sorry that we called you Kyle. I apologize for everyone here at Catholic Answers.
Mea culpa, Maxima.
I was waiting for you. 888-318-7884. Claire is in Ohio. You are next, Claire. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Why was there thunder and lightning in a storm when Jesus died on the cross?
Did you get all of that, Trent?
I did. Now, Claire, the Bible says that there was a great darkness that came across the land when Jesus died, or the sun lost its light. So it's not specific about the weather itself, but that there was a darkness that came across the land when Jesus died. So we don't know exactly what that darkness was, but it's possible that it was storm clouds that blocked out the sun, and there might have been thunder and lightning. And why would that be the case? Well, God chose to die for us on the cross so that our sins could be forgiven. And it was a very painful death, a very sad thing for God, the creator of the universe, to die in a way, a very lonely way, a very painful way. So it's a sad thing. And because God rules over all of creation, he can show us how sad this is through what he made by saying, look at this, that it seems like, there's darkness over this, that our Savior has died. It felt like a very dark moment for Jesus's disciples. Like, what do we do now? And so God brought this darkness so that Jesus's light would be even brighter when he rose from the dead. So a light is really bright when it's in a super dark room. And so this darkness shows the sadness and fear and confusion that the disciples had and the sadness of Jesus being dead. But then from that darkness, we have the light of Jesus rising from the dead. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Claire, that was a really good question. How old are you, Claire?
8.
You're 8, and so you were reading the Bible, or you were watching a movie, or where did you see that it got dark when Jesus died?
I was watching a movie. Ben-Hur. What? Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur.
Oh, you were watching the movie Ben-Hur. Yeah. Did you get to see the chariot race in that?
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yes.
You have such good manners, Claire. I think I was more impressed with the chariot race than you were, but I hope you'll call again. When you have more questions, will you call again?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Back to Ben-Hur. Trent Horn is our guest. It's open forum. Let's see who's next. Igor in Brazil, watching on YouTube live all the way from Brazil. Glad to have you. We don't get a lot of calls from Brazil, Igor. Glad to have you. No? No, Igor? Did I push the wrong?
No.
Can people hear them yelling at me, line 3, not line 2, or is that only me that hears that? I don't know if that goes out. Igor, sorry, I pushed line 2 and you're on line 3. Welcome from Brazil. We're really glad to have you.
Oh, thank you, Sai. Thanks for having me. So, my question is, recently I've been watching some old Catholic Answers videos, and I've come across the explanation that the rosary was not actually given to Saint Dominic by Our Lady, and it got me wondering, because the motive that it was specifically Tim Staples was that there is no early evidence that points to this scenario, which got me wondering, like, wouldn't that be analogous to the Assumption of Mary? And where, if not, where would this analogy lie?
Ah, I see. Yeah, right. So Tim will defend the Assumption, but he's not defending Dominic as the founder of the Rosary. So what gives there, Trent?
Okay, yeah, I guess you'd have to ask Tim in specifics about why he would place the Rosary being. Is this the claim that the Rosary predated Saint Dominic?
Yes. But actually, like, he said that some Dominican priests, even some scholars, they said that there wasn't even much attached. Like, Saint Dominic didn't even leave anything that developed the tradition of the Rosary, like not even the mysteries, presumably, because there was the Psalter of Our Lady, I know, that predates Saint Dominic, but some people claim that, well, he introduced the mysteries part and those
right. So there's different pious traditions that have developed in the Church's history to understand the incorporation of different kinds of devotions, and the Rosary is one of them. And different customs arose over time when it comes to the Assumption. But it wouldn't follow from that there's no early evidence for either of them, even though I think what I would say is we would just have to compare what is the direct historical evidence we have for the Rosary and St. Dominic. What, does he talk about it? What is the length of time from those who attribute it to him? And then compare it to the Assumption, which, of course, the difference here is that the Assumption is not a devotional practice. So I think the analogy is going to break down a bit, because the Assumption is not a devotion. It is an event that occurred in salvation history that was preserved, and the evidence of Christians celebrating the Assumption is going to be found in different forms throughout the Church's history. So you have St. Gregory of Tours talking about it in the year 590, and then also he's preserving a tradition of St. Juvenal describing this in the 5th century. However, I would say we have earlier evidence than that for belief in the Assumption of Mary in Eastern heterodox documents. These are things like the Book of Mary's Repose, for example. So these are books that are not inspired in and of themselves, but do attest to Christian beliefs, like in belief in Jesus' resurrection or belief in Mary's Assumption, even if the book itself has other things that are not orthodox in them. People like Stephen Shoemaker, who's written one of the most extensive treatments on the Assumption and is somewhat skeptical of it, he still dates these Eastern heterodox testimonies of the Assumption to even back. They could be as far back as the 3rd century. So, and of course, other elements of our Catholic faith show up later in church history. We don't have a mention of original sin, for example, of the term original sin until St. Augustine. So I cover that in more detail in my book, The Case for Catholicism, and I would definitely recommend checking that out as well. But thanks for the question, Igor. We certainly do appreciate it.
Igor, and thanks for the call from Brazil. As I said, we don't get a whole lot of calls from Brazil. I got so excited I pushed the wrong button on the phone. We have to take a break, however, so I hope we will get to talk with you again, Igor. But we'll take a break right now. And before we do, I'll just remind you, 20 Answers Lent, our free 20 Answers book, still available at shop.catholic.com. It's in the ebook version. If you'd like a free ebook version of 20 Answers Lent, you'd like to get 20 answers about Lent, just go to shop.catholic.com and you'll find it.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
This is Father Spitzer from Father Spitzer's Universe. May the Lord of all love and consolation send His Holy Spirit down upon you in this season, so that you truly might follow Him as disciple, as apostle, and as saint in His service, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Trent, it's something that I do sometimes. I occasionally make serious mistakes on the phone, and I was serious. I can't tell if it goes out over the air or not when every single person in the booth is yelling, "He's on line 3, not line 2." I didn't know if that goes out, but I guess I'm the only one that hears that, so I won't respond to it next time. It doesn't go. It just seemed really loud. I thought that probably goes out. Sorry about pushing the wrong phone line. 888-318-7884. Trent Horn is our guest. We love it when Trent is around, and let's be honest, he hasn't been around enough lately. We missed him. So we've got him for you for Open Forum today. And you know what Trent does? He wrote Answering Atheism. You got questions about atheism, whether you're atheist or not? Boom. Persuasive pro-life. He loves taking the pro-life questions. You got the big questions. We love it when you have the big questions for Trent. 888-318-7884. Up next in Tennessee, Ann calling from Tennessee. I'm going to push the right button. Ann, you there?
Hey, hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Happy to. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
Yes. My husband is, he was born Catholic, but he has been away from church. He has discovered going to this mega church, and it seems like everybody around me seems to be leaving the Catholic Church, and as well as two of my sisters. One is atheist, and the other two has left the church. And I don't know how to make I want to start from home and have. My husband is asking me why I have so much passion going to church and just attending the Mass, and he doesn't understand because he thinks that it's so boring, and I don't know where to start. And he asked me if I could help him understand so he can come with me.
Wonderful. Okay. Trent?
Yeah, and what I would point to is to say that the reason we go to Mass is to receive Jesus as the new Passover lamb who takes away the sins of the world, who takes away our sins, and that we participate in the new Passover that Jesus instituted at the Last Supper. I would say that the Eucharist, the Catechism says the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. And so if we don't have an appreciation of who Jesus is, what the Eucharist is, that this is truly Jesus' present, his glorified body and blood under the form of bread and wine, and why that matters, why it matters that Jesus is called the Lamb of God. Paul calls Jesus the Paschal Lamb. That how the Bible, in like megaphones with blaring sirens, says, look, Jesus is the Passover lamb who has died, who takes away the sins of the world. And just like people ate the Passover lamb in Exodus, we receive the Passover lamb because Jesus said, my flesh is true food, my blood is true drink. So I think having an intensive focus on the Eucharist will help him to see that Mass is not about an emotional high we get out of it, but about a sacramental joy we receive from it. And that way, it is helpful to look for parishes that have a vibrant and reverent liturgy, and you might have to search high and low. It can be hard to find sometimes. That is helpful. But we should have a love for the Mass that goes beyond the beauty of the liturgy itself, because you might live in an area where the only Catholic church that exists is a bit lackluster with liturgy. But every Catholic church you go to will always have the Eucharist, no matter what, no matter how lackluster the liturgy may be. So I would recommend 2 resources then, Anne. One, we will send you a copy. Why don't we send you 2 copies of my book, Why We're Catholic? One for you, one for your husband. And you can go to the chapter on the Mass, and I think you'll find that to be very helpful.
Okay.
The other thing I would...
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Trent.
No, yeah, so that... Why We're Catholic. The other would be a book I would recommend that you pick up by my friend, Dr. Ted Sri from the Augustine Institute, SRI, Edward Sri. The book is called A Biblical Walk Through the Mass. And what I think can be helpful here is you could talk to your husband and say, well, do you want to do like a Bible study with me? And you could read A Biblical Walk Through the Mass, and it talks about where the Bible is all throughout in the Mass. So it's not boring. It's like, oh, yeah, that's in the Bible, and that's in the Bible. And you get a different perspective on it. And as someone who's embraced Protestantism, Bible study should be a very attractive thing to him. So A Biblical Walk Through the Mass by Edward Sri, and we'll send you Why We're Catholic. So is that a helpful answer?
Yes. I had to type it in really as fast as I can so I can.
But here's what's good, Ann. You can
just give us your email
go back
address
and listen. Well, yeah, but guess what? You can always hear this answer and every other answer because we always post our episodes right after they're done. So if you missed something, go back, listen to it. But a lot of that you'll find in Why We're Catholic, and I pray that it blesses you.
What a beautiful thing that someone would say, "Why are you so passionate about the Mass?" I wish someone would say that to me. I mean, that's a beautiful testimony to Anne's love for the Mass. Let's go to Clifton Park, New York. Thanks, Anne. Thanks very much. Watching on YouTube, Al in Clifton Park, New York. You are next. Go ahead, Al, with your question for Trent Horn.
Yes. My question is, were the early Christians, especially those living in Jerusalem, still practicing Jews? So were they basically following the dietary laws, going to temple, etc.?
Yes. So, Al, when we look at the very first Christians, the majority of them were Jewish. The very first sermon that was preached was by Peter at Pentecost, which was the Jewish festival being held in Jerusalem. So there were a ton of people, Jewish pilgrims in Jerusalem when the church began, and 3,000 of them converted. So the church was overwhelmingly Jewish in its ethnicity and religious observances at the very beginning. And so these Jews believed that, well, they're going to believe Jesus is the Messiah. And many of them also followed the previous Mosaic laws, such as the practice of circumcision and also the dietary laws. Now, the conflict in the early church arose when some of these Jewish Christians said that these rules were obligatory. And when you read in Paul's letters in Galatians and in Colossians, Paul's position is basically, as Christians, we have freedom in Christ. If you want to celebrate a Jewish festival, if you want to celebrate a Jewish rite, you're free to do so as long as you don't deny that Jesus is the Messiah. So one of the Jewish rites you couldn't go back to would be going back to animal sacrifices to take away sins. If you did that, and that's why the letter to the Hebrews is very clear, don't go back to them. Jesus Christ is our high priest. He is the one sacrifice. So you might go to temple in the sense of the synagogue to pray and study and discuss with others, but you wouldn't trust in animal sacrifices at the temple, which stopped 40 years after the church began anyways, when the temple was destroyed. So Paul is clear that the Jews of that time, they could celebrate these other rituals, but they couldn't impose them on others, and they weren't a requirement for faith. But as the church became more Gentile in its composition, there came to be less and less of a focus on celebrating these Jewish rituals. So I hope that is helpful, and I'm glad you called.
Thanks, Al. A lot of folks on the line, so I'm going to try to keep moving, get as many as I can this hour. But Trent will be with us next hour as well. Open Forum will continue next hour. Let's go to Christian, also in New York. Christian, go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hello, I've been waiting. Can you hear me?
You sound... Oh, it's our friend Christian.
Yeah.
All right.
How are you guys?
Very, very well. I don't know if you've met Trent. Let me introduce you. Trent, this is our friend Christian from New York. Christian, this is Trent.
Hello, Christian.
Oh, hello. How are you, Trent?
I'm
I
doing
came
well.
here to ask a question today. I'm so glad everybody's blessed thanks to the glory of God. I was going to ask, the
Sure.
Mary of doctrine that we believe in today, I was wondering, when did she become such a big role model in our church? Not really, we don't idolize her, but we simply ask her to intercede for us. But the point is, when did she become like that big? When did she took that big role in the Christian church? Did the apostles follow did the apostles follow that doctrine like we do today? When was it introduced, and did the apostles believed it?
Okay, Christian, let's let.
Well, I would say that we can trace these dogmas. Their ultimate source is an apostolic source, even though they are reflected in the New Testament. I would say the dogma, for example, of Mary's divine maternity, that she's the mother of God. I would say that and as well as her immaculate conception. I would say it's reflected most strongly in the writings of the evangelist Luke, St. Luke, in his gospel. We don't see the apostles referencing Mary as much in their own writings. Paul talks about how Jesus was born of a woman, born under the law. But I think that represents Mary's humility, just as there are many aspects of Jesus' life that are not in Scripture. But I will say that Mary's status as a role model for Christians was very early in the church's history. We couldn't date to date something. I would say that we can know that it's very early because the earliest hymn that we have recovered from history, a hymn sung as part of liturgy, is a hymn dedicated to Mary. So the oldest Christian hymn is actually a hymn to Mary. It's called the Sub Tuum Presidium, Under Thy Protection. And this is how it's translated in English. It's been dated to the 2nd century. The 3rd century. So the 200s, dated to about the 3rd century. The oldest hymn, it doesn't mean it was invented in the 3rd century. That means that's the oldest we could find. It probably existed long before that. And the hymn goes, "Beneath your compassion we take refuge, O Theotokos," which in the East we still call Mary Theotokos. I go to a Byzantine liturgy. We refer to Mary as Theotokos more than Mary. "Do not despise our petitions in time of trouble." Theotokos means God-bearer, by the way. "But rescue us from dangers, only pure, only blessed one." So I would say the historical evidence we have shows that Mary's role of being an intercessor, the God-bearer, the only pure one, the only blessed one. If we have the scraps of documentation from the 3rd century, the oldest hymns are dedicated to her. I'm sure if we had better archaeological access, we could find it even earlier in the church's history. So I'd say it's very prominent, and that could only be explained as having come from the apostles themselves. So is that a helpful reply?
Christian,
you there? He's resting in the Spirit.
You just knocked him over with that answer because he's
under thy
knocked
protection.
over. Christian lives in New York. He comes from the Dominican Republic. That's right, Dominican Republic, right? I sometimes get my Caribbean islands mixed up. He's awesome. We love it when Christian calls. I hope you'll call again. I don't know. Maybe I messed up the phone. I do that sometimes. So, Christian, if you were trying to answer, it's probably me. Trent Horn is our guest. TrentHornPodcast.com is where you can go to get his podcast, The Council of Trent, which is extremely popular. And I'm trying to hide my jealousy as I say that. People love Trent. TrentHornPodcast.com. What's on there this week, Trent?
This week, we're going to... Well, what's been on there already is we had a Free-for-All Friday on mass hysteria, an episode on what makes God God, and Thursday, we're going to talk about a Catholic approach to infertility. All that and more at TrentHornPodcast.com or on Google and iTunes, The Council of Trent.
Or you can just call him here because we've got him for another hour. If you're on the line, please stay on the line. We're going to get to you as soon as we come back. Our number 888-318-7884. If you haven't dialed yet, Trent Horn, our guest. Open forum means you can call with whatever you want. Be right back to do more of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live. back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be back with Trent Horn, who's been so busy. You're a busy person, Trent. You're a hard-working person, though. I mean, when I used to work in the same building with you, we don't work in the same building now anymore. But when we worked in the same building, I just tried to look busy when you were around, just so by comparison I wouldn't look bad. I was like just moving paper around and acting like I was reading.
Well, I would
stuff.
look at your computer side. That would explain something, because I thought you were just doing weird dialectic poetry. It was just all abacadabra on your laptop.
Yeah, well, that's.
I guess you were just pretending to type.
I would be like ASDF JKL semi, ASDF JKL semi. I wasn't typing. I was just hitting those. At
least you could do lorem ipsum.
Yeah.
Delorem, like the placeholder text.
Right.
At least that might fool the eye.
No, I'm so glad you're out of here, so I don't look as bad as I looked. But Trent Horn podcast, the Council of Trent, that you can find at TrentHornPodcast.com. It really is just blossoming. Lots and lots of people listening.
Oh yeah, we're getting a lot of listens, and I'm excited about the future of the podcast. Actually, well, I'll let people know now. Actually,
What?
A little bit is a little bit of teaser. Yeah.
What? About to make some news here? I didn't even know.
Yeah. So you'll see this next week. So we have the episodes that are going to air this week. Next week, I'm going to start airing the episodes on our Council of Trent YouTube page. And so what's neat about them is I'll have the audio, but I will also have video of me and corresponding PowerPoint slides of what I'm talking about.
Oh, that is awesome. But wait a second. I paused there for a minute because it can kind of confuse me, because some of your stuff, Trent, I don't know if you know this, it's behind a paywall. Like you have sponsors.
Right.
So what'll happen with the YouTube stuff with those?
Oh, well, they will still get access to other things like our Catechism study series, the ability to submit questions for open mailbag episodes, exclusive ability to comment, get a Council of Trent mug. All of that stuff is at TrentHornPodcast.com. But the podcast is out there, and I wanted to share the podcast on YouTube. I didn't want to just put the audio up because I was like, oh, why? What's the purpose of that work? I don't really like doing that. I mean, it would still serve people. But I've included PowerPoint slide elements to make the episodes more informative and engaging, to really make use of that. I'm not going to do YouTube if it's just for audio. Like, I want to use the video elements wisely. So I've already recorded a Free for All Friday and an hour-long episode on a controversial social issue. You'll find out when it drops. And then I have one more to work through. But my goal is to do them all on YouTube as well, and to expand that way.
I have an announcement too. Catholic Answers Focus will now be doing PowerPoint slides on YouTube. Right, Nick? Come make me some PowerPoint slides. I cannot compete with this if I don't have PowerPoint. All right. Yes, Catholic Answers Focus will now have PowerPoint slides on our YouTube page.
It's just white backgrounds with 12-point black font.
And we're going to use better fonts. All right, so there's
12-point font, white background, yellow text.
Stop upping your game, Trent.
You'll try not to do that.
Let's go to Noah in Westmont, Illinois, watching on YouTube Live. Noah, delighted to have you. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on. So I've heard from you guys and various other Catholic speakers that the mixed genitalia or mixed chromosomes in intersex people are ultimately a result of the disorderment of the fall. And I'm trying to learn how, I should converse with a family member of mine who is very much transgenderism and homosexual affirming. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, and because I don't know much about the science and the research behind intersex, and she is much more knowledgeable than I am and has taken a lot of classes on it.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if this is true, that it is disordered from the fall. How do you tell which gender they were supposed to have been? Had they not been affected that way? There's people with, that have XXY chromosomes. I'm like, is it supposed to be XX or is XY? Which one is not supposed to be there? And and how do those people? How should they identify themselves, or what should they call themselves in those cases? Like, because that's a common argument I know, like from people from that camp.
Got it, Noah. Thank you.
Right. So a few thoughts on that. First, it's very important to make a distinction between intersex cases and transgender identity. So intersex involves the question of what someone's biological sex is, whether they are male or female. And usually it involves some kind of a misalignment between their genetic chromosomes and between their genotype, their genes, and their phenotype, or the development of their secondary sex characteristics. This can take on a variety of forms, like the inability to process androgens, which can make men actually appear very female, even though they have a male genotype, like complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. This can also just take the place with ambiguous genitalia in some infants. But you can still, on many of these cases, do a genetic karyotype test, and you can still see if they're XX or XY. But first, you need to distinguish it. So that's just about the biology, whether you're male or female. Transgender is about whether your sense of male or female corresponds with your biology. And I would say in 99% of cases, a person who identifies as transgender is not intersex. In the vast majority of cases, those people who identify as transgender, it is very clear biologically whether they are a man or a woman. So I wouldn't be concerned about, I would say the issues are separate, that we could have discussions about intersex issues at one point, but transgender ideology stands or falls on its own. It's not connected to intersex in an essential way. So I would say, look, you could bracket it and just say transgender people have almost always the correct chromosomes and the secondary sex characteristics. They are, for all biological purposes, a man or a woman, except for what they claim. Now, with intersex, there are even in cases where someone has ambiguous genitalia, there are many things to help us determine, not necessarily whether they were supposed to be a man or a woman, but to determine they are a man or they are a woman. They just may have some kind of stunted development. And I would say when we talk about the fall, we're not saying these intersex people are fallen from the fall and we're all not. We all have bodily ailments that are a result of being fallen creatures. So we will have genetic abnormalities, variations. Some of us may be born with disfigurements or other genetic predispositions. It affects all of us. But even with intersex, I would say in the vast majority of cases of so-called intersex, even with the chromosomes that are different, we know whether this is a man or a woman. So the most common examples would be Turner syndrome, which is where you only have 45 chromosomes. Instead of XX, which is 46 for women, XX, you have just a single X. And so that would be Turner syndrome. You're a biological female, but you tend to struggle with infertility and stunted secondary sex characteristics. Klinefelter is the other common one. That would be XXY, and that's a biological male. And there are others that show up, XYY, triple XY. When I've studied these, it seems clear that when the Y chromosome shows up, it seems very clear this person is a biological male, but the presence of the other X's seems to impact their fertility and some of their development. But I would say that there are only a tiny sliver, a minority of cases where it's really, really difficult. I've only found one of someone that was XXY that was capable of giving birth to a child. It's a rare case, and it may be hard to determine whether we have a man or a woman here. But I would say that the cases where we are not sure do not disprove the vast majority of cases where we are sure. Much the same way, there are cases where we're not sure if somebody is alive or dead, like they seem brain dead, but they're not. And so we're like, well, are they alive or are they dead? Oh, we're not sure. But that doesn't mean we can't tell 99.9% of the time whether someone's alive or dead. It's biology, we can tell that.
And it also doesn't mean there's no difference between death and life. It doesn't mean that.
Right. It doesn't mean there's no difference either. There certainly is. So, Noah, I would recommend, if you would like, Noah and all of our listeners, here's what I would recommend. Go to Barnes & Noble, not Amazon. Go to Barnes & Noble or go directly to the publisher. I think it's Regnery. I'm not sure. And get Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally, a response to the transgender movement. So the book is When Harry Became Sally, a response to the transgender movement. Go get it now at Barnes & Noble while you can, because Amazon has just stopped selling the book. They have just stopped. Probably because people complain and say it's hate speech when it isn't. So that is very concerning. So get the book while you can, while it's available for purchase from book dealers. Go get When Harry Became Sally by Ryan Anderson. I think that'd be very helpful. So Noah, is that a helpful reply?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. So ultimately, just to clarify what you're saying, and I really appreciate all of that from someone who doesn't know a lot about it, and it's been kind of a point of contention, sort of.
Sure.
So you're saying that ultimately it's like the fact that those extra chromosomes, however they come in, are just a result of the disorderment. Like that was just how they happened to have been affected, basically, right? As no different than someone else is affected by the fall.
Right, like somebody might get trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, or other people may have a genetic abnormality that produces something that's beneficial or not beneficial. So I would just say that we all have genetic variances, but we still know there are men and there are women, and men can't become women. And with this person who defends transgender ideology, Noah, you should ask them, actually, stay on the line, give your email to our call screener. I'll send you an article I wrote on tough questions for transgender advocates. So, for example, you could ask your friend Noah, okay, well, what is a woman? What is a man? They're not the same thing. If you say a transgender woman is a man, people will want to string you up in modern culture. But they know men and women are different. And I would ask them, well, what is a woman? What is a man? And you can't define it objectively without recourse to biology, which shows transgender ideology simply doesn't work. So I hope that's helpful for you. I'll send you the email, and our listeners, get When Harry Became Sally when you can.
And Noah, if you give your email address to Marie, we'll get it to Trent, and you can have that communication. This has nothing to do with Trent's announcement about his podcast, but I just want to announce that our podcast here, Catholic Answers Live on YouTube, will now have pictures of cats. It is nothing. I'm not trying to show Trent up. I'm just saying that our podcast will now have pictures of cats. We're going to take a quick break. Right back with more Open Forum right after this.
This is Bishop Chad Zielinski from the Diocese of Fairbanks of Northern Alaska, and you are listening to Catholic Answers Live.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
How should we pray? The disciples asked our Lord that question, and he gave them the Our Father, or the Lord's Prayer. But he also gave them the liturgy, which is the most privileged form of prayer in the Catholic tradition, especially the holy sacrifice of the Mass. We can pray with the whole Church in the liturgy of the hours or the divine office, and we should also pray in our own private room, our secret chamber, as Jesus says, and then our Father who sees us in secret will reward us.
I think if you pray and you say to the Lord, Lord, I don't understand, thy will be done. That's a prayer of faith. If something wonderful happens and I say, thank you, Lord, that's a prayer of thanksgiving. If you're distressed and you say, Lord, help me, I can't do anything about this, that's a prayer of hope. And you say, Lord, I can't take one more thing. That's a prayer of desperation. If you're talking to him about it, that's prayer.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Trent Horn, our guest, making some news this hour with us. Trent Horn podcast about to be available on YouTube with PowerPoint slides. We also making some news here at Catholic Answers Live. Our podcast will now include pictures of cats. Our number is 888-318-7884. Trent Horn is a an apologist extraordinaire, author of a whole bunch of books, including Persuasive Pro-Life, Answering Atheism, Why We're Catholic, and a whole bunch more. You are welcome to call with your questions, 888-318-7884. They haven't gone easy on you today. Big questions today about big, important issues.
No, I'm excited about it.
All right, let's go to Matilda in New Mexico, listening on 98.9 FM. Matilda, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Okay, so I'm calling because I personally, I think that the coronavirus vaccine is the mark of the beast, but I just want to, I guess, get clarification on the signs when the mark will be coming, or if that vaccine is the mark of the beast.
Thank you, Matilda.
Sure, Matilda. And what I would say is that the church does not have a specific teaching about what specifically the book of Revelation is referring to when it talks about the mark of the beast. But the beast is a figure that appears in the 13th chapter of the book of Revelation. And it is involved with deception and leading people away from God and towards Antichrist. And so John's revelation is highly symbolic, many symbolic elements here. And we have to understand that what we know about the beast is that the numbers of his name add up to 666. And it says those who worship the beast, they will receive a mark on their forehead, be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666. Other manuscripts have 616. And I would say, well, what evidence would we have that the COVID vaccine is the mark of the beast? I would say, well, I don't see any evidence there. I think one of the best hypotheses for who the beast is would have been, John was talking about the Emperor Nero, who was also would be affiliated with Antichrist, that the emperor was worshipped as God, persecuted Christians. The number, his Roman name added up to 666 or 616 based on how you count. And the mark, my colleague Jimmy Akin has written a wonderful article about this. He's discussed this in a previous episode of Catholic Answers Live. And he thinks that just as the book of Ezekiel talks about an invisible mark placed on believers by angels, the mark of the beast as a counterpoint to that would be a kind of spiritual mark upon the followers of the beast itself. Now, I would just say this, Matilda. We look at the COVID vaccine. I would say, well, what would that have to do with the mark of the beast? It's a medicine to prevent a disease. You don't get the vaccine you don't get injected with the vaccine on your forehead or your right hand. You would get it in your arm. And there's been currently nothing saying that people can't engage in commerce unless they have the vaccine. I mean, you could always even order things online without it, but there's no reason to think people will be prohibited from engaging in commerce or things like that unless they've received it. But even still, it's not a it doesn't fall under that. I don't see a good reason to associate it with that. So does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Matilda. All right.
Perfect. And one other point I would raise that Jimmy has raised is that God in his wisdom would not allow his people to just be simply deceived by something like this. There would be clear signs that in choosing this mark, you would be forsaking God and worshiping something else that is not God. And you're not doing that if you receive the COVID-19 vaccine.
Matilda, I'm so glad you gave us the opportunity to talk about that. I know many people have been talking about it, and thank you so much. I hope you'll call again as more questions come up. We're going to go to Omaha, Nebraska now, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Chrissy, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Thank you so much. I'd like to ask Trent a question. What is the difference between agnostic and atheism?
Okay.
Sure. It depends who you ask, because the words mean different things to different people. But traditionally, in the history of philosophy, an atheist, well, I guess the difference would be summarized in how you answer this question. Does God exist? So there's three ways you can answer the question. Yes, no, or maybe / I don't know. So if you say, yes, God does exist, you would be a theist. If you say, no, God does not exist, you deny the existence of God, you would be an atheist. And if you say, I don't know if this or maybe God exists, then you would be an agnostic. That's the traditional definition. But most modern atheists will say that they are atheists, but they're really agnostics. They would say they don't believe in God, but they're not going to claim there is no God. And I don't necessarily want to argue with them about terms unnecessarily, but it's important for them to see, okay, is your answer to the question of God, is it no, he doesn't exist, or maybe he does? If it's maybe, if it's a possibility, then you should be more of an agnostic than an atheist. So I hope that's a sufficient answer for your question.
Does that work, Chrissy?
Yes, that will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very glad that you called. 888-318-7884, our number. Man, lines are very, very full, so we will just keep moving. Let's go to Alabama now. Watching on Facebook Live is John in Alabama. John, glad to have you. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Oh, thank you guys very much for having me. Trent, I'm a huge fan of yours. I have 2 of your books.
Thank you.
Anyway, so my question is how do I respond to certain skeptics online when they will quote church fathers like St. Clement and say there's sexist comments in their quotes? Like, for example, St. Clement of Alexandria said, women's very consciousness of their own nature must invoke feelings of shame. And when these comments come out, there's usually more than one of them. You know, that it's all whole list. They'll hammer you all at one time, and it's really hard to address so many things being thrown at me at one time. But I just would like your opinion how to answer a specific question of, like St. Clement when he says a woman's very consciousness of their own nature must invoke a feeling of shame.
Okay.
Right. So John, I think I would ask them, I would say, okay, what does this prove that this Catholic who lived 2,000 years ago said this statement about women or about certain groups that we would no longer hold to be true today? What would follow from that? You could say, okay, this guy was wrong in what he said about women. What does that prove about the Catholic Church? The Catholic Church does not say everything a church father said is infallible. Far, far from it. The church fathers are not infallible. They are witnesses of sacred tradition that has been passed through their writings. So they are a witness to sacred tradition. But the church fathers themselves, they are not sacred tradition. They are witnesses to it. Their writings are not infallible. They can make mistakes about things. And I would say that our understanding of the nature of the equality and roles between men and women, human beings, sometimes they grow in morality, not just in their own lives, but over the course of human history, they grow in their understanding of how to take gospel principles and apply them to the world. And so I think you could point to the Bible to say, well, does the Bible teach that men and women are equals? And I would say, well, yes, it doesn't. It says men and women are equal. Galatians 3:28 says there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. We're all one in Christ Jesus. God chose to be man through a woman. He chose to be born of a woman. Those who say the church is sexist, I would say to them, if the church is sexist, why do we exalt say that the creature of all of God's creation, the part of creation that deserves the most praise is a woman, the Blessed Virgin? So that's one route that I might take. I might say, well, what does this prove? You can only disprove the Catholic Church if you could show the Catholic Church officially taught something that was like intrinsically evil, and it doesn't when it comes to men and women. Number two, John, I would turn the question back on them to say, it sounds like you're saying it is always wrong to be sexist, as if this is a moral fact of the universe, that we ought, no matter our time and culture, we ought not be sexist. And I would say, all right, where does that moral fact come from? If it's just your opinion, why should anyone care about your opinion? But if it is a fact that all people are equals, then we have to say what makes us equal. Only God creating us in his image can explain that fact.
Oh, you did a little
So I hope
turnaround.
that's helpful.
John, thanks. I appreciate the call. Lots more folks on the line, so we're going to try to get to everybody before we have to go. Trent Horn, our guest, open forum today on Catholic Answers Live.
Bringing you the truth. Catholic Answers Live.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is one of the most courageous leaders in the church, known for his outspoken support of unborn life, Orthodox faith and morals, and reforming Catholic institutions. In his groundbreaking new book, Light and Leaven, he offers a forthright perspective on the state of the church today and calls on the lay faithful to meet its challenges boldly. Touching on topics including parish renewal, the centrality of the Eucharist, the need for prayer and silence in a noisy and distracted age, and the battle between good and evil in the church and world, Bishop Strickland's wise insights and evident love for souls will inspire and edify you. To order your copy of Light and Leaven, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Our guest, Trent Horn. You might know him from his podcasts, Council of Trent, which you can find at TrentHornPodcast.com. You might know him from one of his 73 books, including the Bible. No, I was going to say the Bible is a Catholic book. That's the one book I got here on the desk. It's not his. No, Persuasive Pro-Life, Answering Atheism, the one where there's like things the saints never said. That's a great one. Trent Horn, our guest, and big news. You're going to be able to find Trent's podcast on YouTube, which I think is just great. And you know what I have to say, Trent? I don't want to say this in a way that's critical of anyone, but I like that your podcast is so civil. I feel like as Catholics in the public sphere, if we're going to be on social media, if we're going to be doing podcasts and stuff, it shouldn't be like ripping on people and using, I don't know, I see a lot of negativity in Catholic media right now, and I love that you'll talk to anybody about anything in a civil way.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting, Cy? There are Catholic podcasters and media out there who have very negative views towards the church, even though they are Catholic. And I think it is fine to offer respectful criticism of church leaders. I think that's fine. But, you know, so they're going to do that. I want to equip Catholics to go and help Catholics return to the faith and help non-Catholics become Catholic. Now, what's interesting, though, Cy, is that many of those commenters who are very critical of the hierarchy, and sometimes in a mean-spirited way, it's interesting that I don't really see them very often engage in dialogue with non-Catholics.
Yeah.
It's very rare. I don't see them just sit down with an atheist or a Protestant for a dialogue on the differences between them, or they don't. And I don't think that's healthy. We need to be able to evangelize, dialogue, public formal debate. I think these are all very good things. So with different people based on the appropriate venues and forums. So I think that would be, and so what I strive to do on my podcast, whether I'm having a dialogue or I'm just talking about an issue, I just want to be fair and charitable, though I may have my own personal opinion on matters, and sometimes I have a very strong opinion, but that doesn't mean you have to lose charity when you're discussing things.
888-318-7884, our number here. Danny in Jacksonville, Florida, watching on YouTube Live. You are up next. Danny, go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hi. Really, I've been watching a lot of your videos lately. Really enjoy them. And my question is to whenever skeptics bring up the question the reliability of the New Testament because of two specific things. One being that they were written anonymously, and two, they were written several decades after the lifetime of Jesus.
Right.
How should I address those 2 points, that they were written anonymously and written well after Jesus' lifetime?
Okay, thanks, Danny.
Right. I would ask them, Danny, to say, all right, what is your standard for a document in the ancient world to be reliable? I would say you give me the standard when it comes to both how we determine the authorship of a work and how long after the events it describes it was composed. So I might say, look, are you saying a book is not reliable if it was written more than 20 years, or let's say, more than 40 years after the events it purports to describe, 40 or 50 years. If it was written, let's say, 100 years later. If that's the case, then they're going to have to discount the vast majority of ancient history. For example, the claim that Hannibal crossed the Alps with war elephants was written down 50 or 60 years later by a Roman historian. The accounts of Alexander the Great, his biography, was 400 years later. The first accounts we have of William Wallace in England from the movie Braveheart are from a blind minstrel that were written 150 years later. So the problem is, I would ask them, what's your standard? And if the Gospels don't meet your standard, you're going to have to throw out almost all of ancient history as well. If you don't throw out ancient history, then that means you have a double standard for the Bible then, which is unacceptable. So, and I would say, though, when it comes to written within a few decades of the events they describe, that is still within the framework for eyewitnesses to accurately record events. I was watching on the Library of Congress, they had old videos of World War I veterans that were recorded in the 80s and 90s. These are people who are talking about events that happened 70 or 80 years later that were as clear as if they had just been there yesterday. So if we trust that, then I would say, all right, do you trust people who describe when they fought? Like if you talk to a Vietnam War veteran today, would you say he couldn't possibly remember Vietnam? He couldn't. No, we wouldn't say that. They could remember it even though that occurred 50 years ago. And that would put us in the same framework as the apostles. But I would say the Gospels were written. There's good evidence that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written before 70 A.D. And I talk about that in my book, The Case Counterfeit Christ. As for the authorship, Danny, I would say to them, how do they know the Gospels are anonymous? They might say, well, the Gospels in their text never say who their author is. It's just ascribed to it. I would then ask them, how is it that in the ancient church we have never found a manuscript saying that one gospel was actually written by somebody else? The manuscripts always align. It's always Mark's gospel, always has the Gospel of Mark at the top of it. And by the way, if they were anonymous, strictly speaking, why would you pick nobodies like Mark or Luke or lower tier apostles like Matthew? Why would you pick these if you're just kind of, the Gospels that are made up usually have names like Philip and Peter and things like that. That doesn't discount John's Gospel. We have very good historical evidence for John. But I would just critique that idea. So that's just a few thoughts there. I would also recommend to you, Danny, a book called I believe it's called The Case for Jesus by Brant Petrie. I think it's called The Case for Jesus. Let me just make sure. But he has a whole series of chapters on the reliability of the Gospels. Well, two books. One is Craig Blomberg, Reliability of the Gospels, and the other is The Case for Jesus by Brant Petrie, is what I would recommend for you. So is that a helpful reply?
Mostly, just kind of adding on to that.
Sure.
Because they also bring up the fact that, if it is anonymous, because I have read a few, historical papers, and a lot of them do say that there is good reason. I don't remember the specifics of them, but there are good reasons to think they're anonymous, and that they were compiled and written off of oral tradition, and that's the other part of why some skeptics claim, because it was passed through oral tradition.
Right.
That's just the other aspect of it.
Yeah, and what I would say, Danny, is that, there's going to be liberal, you can hold that view and still be Catholic. There are liberal Catholic biblical scholars who claim that the Gospels are anonymous and weren't really written by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Though I would say, though, that the consensus of the church's history places a very, very heavy weight on that consensus of who the authors were. So I would to take from that, they say, well, they are anonymous. I'd still press them. Well, what are your reasons for it? Because when we have, like, the letter to the Hebrews, for example, I would say that is an anonymous letter. We don't know who the author is. We know it has an apostolic origin to it somehow. But people in the early church ascribed it to a variety of individuals. We never see that with the Gospels. Now, it's true the Gospels don't name their own authors, and some people will say, well, Matthew refers to himself in the third person, so clearly Matthew didn't write Matthew. Well, Josephus refers to himself in the third person, and he was a Jewish historian that lived in the first century. Matthew includes a lot of Mark's material, so Matthew couldn't have written it. Well, Mark was the traveling companion of Peter, so it would make sense for Matthew, as a lower tier apostle, to go straight to the source, somebody who was in close contact with Peter, the leader of the church, and the person who was one of the closest people to Jesus during his earthly ministry. Now, with oral tradition, I would say to them, look, this isn't a case of tradition being handed down over hundreds of years being distorted. A.N. Sherwin-White was a Greco-Roman historian who said that it takes more than 2 generations for myth to overtake the historical core of a narrative that is passed on through oral tradition. And we know the Gospels were written within 1 generation of the lifetime of Jesus' followers. So check out Blomberg, Historical Reliability of the Gospels, and Brant Petrie, The Case for Jesus. My book, Counterfeit Christ, might also... Well, Danny, let's get your email or your address. We'll send you Counterfeit Christ. You might also enjoy that as well. So,
thanks, Danny. Got to take a quick break. Right back with more Open Forum with Trent Horn on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Alexander Sample of the Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. Keep that dial right here on Catholic Answers Live.
St. John Paul II stated that, for the disciple of Christ, evangelization is a duty, an obligation of love, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that evangelization is necessary for salvation.
So we know we're called, but how do we do it?
St. Paul Street Evangelization can help. To learn more, contact us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Wings is the weekly newsletter that's packed with program info, features, and updates of all that's going on at the Global Catholic Network. Just go to ewtn.com/wings. Fill out your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. When you get yours, send it to all your friends, and they can send it to their friends. And pretty soon, we're covering the whole world with the good news about EWTN. Wings, the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Our friend Father Sebastian Walsh has produced another very fine book for Catholic Answers Press. You probably remember Secrets from Heaven, the great book he did on on the parables and sayings of Jesus. And this time he's got one for helping your kids stay Catholic. And if they have left, bringing them back. It's called Always a Catholic. How to keep your kids in the faith for life and bring them back if they've strayed. You can get 25% off Always a Catholic right now, today, if you go to shop.catholic.com. Always a Catholic. Oh, no, you know what? They have a special website for it, alwaysacatholic.com. That's even easier. Just go to alwaysacatholic.com, get 25% off in order to get your copy of the brand new book from Father Sebastian Walsh. Our guest this hour is Trent Horn. Trent Horn, an extraordinary apologist for us here at Catholic Answers and author of many books and the proprietor of, I always want to say TrentHornPodcast.com, but he's the proprietor of The Council of Trent. That's his podcast, and you can find it at TrentHornPodcast.com. Up next in Toledo, Ohio, listening on Annunciation Radio is Tim. Tim, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn. Hi, Tim.
Tim? Hello?
Tim in Toledo? Okay. And guess what? I pushed the right button. It's not me this time. I love it when there's something goes wrong and it's not my fault. Let's go to Matthew in Pennsylvania. That's probably sounded kind of petty. Matthew in Pennsylvania, watching on YouTube Live. And Tim, by the way, we'll come back to you in a minute, so don't hang up. We're going to come back to you and give you another try. Matthew in Pennsylvania, are you there with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can, yeah. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
All right. Thank you for having me, by the way. I had a quick question. I've heard a lot of people, like I've been online in debate servers, and I've heard a lot of controversy around John Paul II, and they sent a quote, and this is from the Vatican website, from John Paul II, and it shows him basically praying to St. John the Baptist, asking St. John the Baptist to protect Islam. So I guess the controversy around it is why would he ask St. John the Baptist to protect Islam, or that's like an evil religion, so to say.
All right. Well,
right. Yeah, so I see the quote here. This comes from a pilgrimage the Holy Father made in the year 2000 to the Holy Land. And he was visiting, I think, an area in Jordan called Wadi al-Qarar. And so he was speaking about John the Baptist. And so he was speaking about the readings there. And he was primarily addressing the Catholic community of Jordan that had gathered there to hear his address. But he also says, I cordially greet the representatives of other communities who have come from many other parts of the Middle East. I am grateful to you all. He says a special greetings to His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed, who was probably the royal figure leader in Jordan at that time. He says, I will keep all the people of Jordan, Christians and Muslims, in my prayers, especially the sick and the elderly. With gratitude, I invoke abundant blessings upon His Highness the King and upon the whole nation. God bless you all. God bless Jordan. So this is something he seems to be saying off the cuff of his, off the top of his head as he's ending an address and probably leaving their presence. May St. John Baptist, notice here, he doesn't even say may St. John the Baptist. He says, may St. John Baptist protect Islam and all the people of Jordan and all who participated in this celebration. A memorable celebration. I'm very grateful to all of you. So what do we make from this? I do not think this means that John Paul II wanted St. John the Baptist to help Islam flourish as a religion, for people to not become Christian and to be Muslim instead. I don't see any good evidence that that is what Pope St. John Paul II intended. Rather, I think there's a lot of other hypotheses of what he meant by this. Given the nature of the response, he may have misspoke, just like he didn't say St. John the Baptist, but he said St. John Baptist. He might have meant, may St. John the Baptist protect Muslims and all the people of Jordan. He's talking about people rather than systems. And it's also apropos for him to say, may St. John the Baptist protect you, because even amongst Muslims, there is persecution, violence, Just as St. John the Baptist lost his head, there are people who would lose their heads in the Middle East for even infighting among Muslims. So he cared a lot about peace and stability in the region. So I think what's probably going on here is that he just kind of misspoke, and he's saying, look, I want all of you who are here, especially the Muslims who came to hear me, the Pope, speak, who would normally say I'm an idolater. May God protect you from whatever is going on, and God watch over you. He also may be saying that maybe he wants, I guess that's what I think he's saying. You could say, well, if he's talking about Islam as a whole, maybe he's saying, may God protect the Muslim faith in the sense of continuing to move it towards truth and protecting the truth that is within Islam, that there's only one God, for example. We're not polytheists or monotheists. There's one God, and that God has revealed himself in the Old and the New Testaments, and moving Islam to ultimate truth. That's another route. But I would say the one that's off the table for me is that John Paul II is a heretic and wants people to become Muslims. I think it makes more sense he just kind of misspoke and was praying for the protection of Muslims in general and trying to show goodwill to the Muslims that came to hear him speak in Jordan that day. And so I think it's important just to remember that and to know that the Pope, look, he's not infallible when he gives. We talked about this with Francis for a long time. When the Pope gives addresses, sometimes he says things in a great way, sometimes he says them in a not great way, but he's still the Pope. Is that a helpful reply, Matthew?
Yeah, actually, that is. That is.
You seem surprised, Matthew. Like actually, but a lot of times Trent gives helpful answers. This is not a first time. I got to say thanks though, Matthew, because we're very short on time and there are lots of people on the line. I got to go to Christopher right here in California, watching on YouTube Live. Christopher, go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hi there. It's kind of a two-part question. The first of which is about the historicity of Exodus. From what I understand, it's relatively questionable and in some cases isn't supposed to be interpreted literally. So assuming that's correct, though, doesn't that kind of undermine or undercut at least the significance of what Jesus does that follows in the New Testament? Things like the Eucharist, which is kind of like the manna from heaven 2.0 or the sacrificial lamb 2.0 kind of thing.
All right.
Yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
It did. I thought it did. Makes sense to you, Trent?
Yeah, it does. And so when it comes to the historicity of the Exodus, Christopher, I think there are different propositions. I think some people who criticize the Exodus, what they're attacking is more of how some people will read the Bible, and they'll say that, well, the Bible says there 1 million Jews left left Egypt and wandered in the desert for 40 years. And so they'll say there's no evidence of such a large group of people migrating in the ancient world, and their arguments against the historicity of the Exodus are not, here's evidence it didn't happen. Usually it's just, well, we don't have corroborating evidence in documents or in archaeological finds that it did happen. So they're making an argument from silence. And I would be very cautious of this because I believe there is evidence for the historicity of the Exodus. Even in the absence of evidence that skeptics bring up. So a few thoughts on that. First, this has happened before. In the 19th century, biblical scholars claimed the Bible was wrong about the Hittites. They said there's no evidence the Hittites ever existed, and so the Bible was wrong about them. But then archaeological evidence for the Hittites was discovered in the late 19th century, and the Bible was vindicated. Something similar could happen for the Exodus. There's archaeological finds, I think the tomb of Cleopatra and the tombs of other people who are described in a lot of Egyptian literature. We haven't found those archaeological elements. We would not expect to find. Now, I would say that it was probably not 1 million people who left Egypt for Israel. It could have been a very small number of people. And the word we translate, and there's a translation issue that we're talking about, not 600,000 men, but like 600 clans or 600 families, or the large numbers are a way just to speak of the importance of Israel, and they're not actually literal, that in the ancient world, people use numbers for all kinds of non-literal means. And so there's a small group of families that left. Let's say it was 600 of them that were slaves. They left and then established themselves in Canaan. Well, we do have evidence from archaeology and other documents of Semitic speaking people in the Egyptian Delta. We have evidence of these people interacting with Egyptian officials, of kind of a wandering band of people called I think they're called the Habaru, Habiru. I'm not saying these were the Hebrews, but the Habaru were a kind of nomadic wandering tribe that were Semitic that the Hebrews may have been a part of that. So there's a lot there. I wouldn't expect to find a lot of archaeological evidence because you've got a small number of people traveling through the wilderness with materials that are going to degrade over time. There used to be billions of passenger pigeons in the U.S. We've only found like 100 fossils of them, even though billions of them used to live here in the United States. I talk about this at length, Christopher, in my book, Hard Sayings, A Catholic Approach to Answering Bible Difficulties. So I'm happy to send you that book. I would also so let's get your information and I'll send that to you. I would also recommend 2 books on the question by a very good Egyptologist, James Hoffmeyer. One is called Israel in Egypt, The Evidence for the Authenticity of the Exodus, and the other is Ancient Israel in Sinai, The Evidence for the Wilderness Narratives. Both are written by James Hoffmeyer, very good Egyptologist. So I'd recommend both, but we'll send you a copy of Hard Sayings, which has a section on the historicity of the Exodus.
Thanks, Christopher. I'm going to keep moving. I want to get somebody else on, at least one more on before we have to go with Trent. Let's go to Michael in Dallas, Texas, watching on YouTube. Michael, we're very glad to have you. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Mr. Horn, I would just like to say it is my absolute pleasure to be speaking with you right now.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the work that you've done in the pro-life community and representing the unborn. It's just unparalleled. So thank you for all your labor.
Thank you.
My question for you is, I believe that abortion should be illegal. I believe it's a heinous act and it should be illegal. But I wanted to get your thoughts on how should we go about dealing punishment if it is indeed made illegal for either women who continue to get abortions anyway or doctors who perform them.
Right. And so what I would say is that if abortion becomes illegal, if a majority of people agree that abortion should become illegal, this question is interesting that some people try to treat it as an argument against the pro-life position, that people say, oh, you couldn't agree to punishing people women who choose abortion, doctors who choose abortion. There's something they can't fathom, and it is difficult to fathom in a culture that generally supports legal abortion. But keep in mind, if we reach the point where abortion was made illegal, the only way to sustain that in a democratic republic like ours would be through a massive consensus that it ought to be illegal and the force of law should rest behind it. Now, what should the punishment be? Well, it depends. Like the killing of born people, the punishment for killing a born person is not uniform. Some people who kill born people get life in prison. Other people who kill born people, they don't even go to jail at all. They're given mental health treatment. They go on probation. So I would say it really depends. I would say there should be a different punishment for doctors who know what this is and profit from it and engage in it, and women who choose it for a variety of circumstances. I would say that we should treat, in a time when abortion is illegal, we should treat women and men who participate in this procedure and procure it with the same way that we treat women and men who kill infants. Some cases of infanticide are severely prosecuted. Other cases of infanticide, we recognize emotional distress and harm, and we seek mental health for the person who is engaged in it. So I would say that if we made abortion illegal, we could craft feticide laws that are on par with laws dealing with infanticide that are more common in other countries. So I hope that's a helpful answer.
And I will just say thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. And a very hearty thank you to Trent Horn. Thanks for doing 2 whole hours with us today, Trent. It's great to have you back.
Yes, happy to be here. Looking forward to doing more shows.
Maybe tomorrow.
I think I will be on tomorrow. I'm doing a lot this week. It'll be fun.
Yeah, okay. You and I'm glad you responded positively, because I would be a bummer if you said, no, I'm not, because we'd have to find somebody else. But it's you and Carlo tomorrow. We're going to have a lot of fun, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.